Eve pole na automana na way. Ina na way.
This book describes one of the great early voyages of discovery, an expedition to Guiana in South America, made by Sir Walter Raleigh, the English courtier, adventurer, pirate, man of letters, and one-time favorite of Queen Elizabeth I. The objective of Raleigh's 1595 expedition was at least threefold: to obtain for England the rich resources of South America, in particular the gold of the fabled city of El Dorado, and to establish an English settlement at the mouth of the Orinoco River, from which to challenge the Spanish. Raleigh's third objective was more personal. He sought to re-ingratiate himself with the Queen, whose favor he had lost through an affair with one of Her Majesty's ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Throckmorton, whom Raleigh married in secret. This transgression landed Raleigh and his wife in prison. Upon their release, Raleigh tried to redeem himself. In 1594, Raleigh organized an expedition to Trinidad, where the Spanish governor had executed a small English contingent. Raleigh set out to capture the colony and to question the governor about the location of the fabled El Dorado. In February of 1595, he set sail, and thus began the voyage that would take Raleigh to the New World and up the Orinoco River, penetrating 400 miles into the interior. Published upon his return to England in 1596, Raleigh's account of his expedition created a sensation in England and in Europe. What he wrote of the tribes whom he encountered and his descriptions of the exotic flora, fauna, and geography of the region, while of great interest to his audience, was all outshone by Raleigh's descriptions of the fabulous and bizarre. Fierce Amazons, monstrous humans, cannibals, and at the heart of it all, the search for a mythical city of gold. Raleigh's account was originally published without illustrations. It was left to the enterprising publisher Levinus Hulsius to augment Raleigh's vivid descriptions with striking images of this fabled land and these fantastic creatures. The title page of Hulsius' edition, published in German for a broader European audience, promised readers, quote, "a wonderful description of the gold-rich kingdom of Guiana in America, or the New World, which has been visited lately by Sir Walter Raleigh, an English knight." Raleigh's narrative is a mixture of fact and hearsay, of the explorer's first-hand experience, augmented with what he learned from the Amerindians and Spaniards whom he questioned. His descriptions of the Orinoco River and its tributaries, and of the tribes whom he encountered, are full of accurate information not recorded elsewhere, and are still of great value to modern ethnographers, historical geographers, and climatologists. An excellent example of this is illustrated in Hulsius' edition. We see the habitations of the Warrow Indians, who have adapted to the seasonal rise and fall of the Orinoco River by building an ingenious type of dwelling. Raleigh writes, "In the summer, the Warrow have houses on the ground, as in other places. In the winter, they dwell upon the trees, where they build very artificial towns and villages. For between May and September, the river riseth 30 foot upright, and then the islands are overflown 20 feet high above the level of the ground, saving some few raised grounds in the middle of them, and for this cause they are enforced to live in this manner." When it comes to Raleigh's botanical and zoological descriptions, the information is presented within the context of his experience. In the fifth plate in Hulsius' book, we see an armadillo, which Raleigh describes in the context of dinner. Quote, "One of the Indians gave me a beast called by the Spaniards armadillo, which the natives call casacum, which seems to be all barred over with small plates, somewhat like to a rhinoceros, with a white horn growing in his hinder parts, as big as a great hunting horn, which they use to pass wind instead of as a trumpet. When Hulsius created his illustration, he did not need to rely solely on Raleigh's description. Specimens of the animal had been brought to Europe long before Raleigh set sail, and illustrations, if not numerous, were easily accessible to artists and printers. Another animal in the image, the sloth, was not described by Raleigh at all. The depiction, and in fact much of the composition, is derived from an earlier woodcut based on the account of the explorer André Thevet, who described the animal as looking like a little bear with the face of a baby. What thrilled Raleigh's readers the most were his descriptions of mysterious women warriors, ferocious cannibals, and half-human monsters. Raleigh never personally encountered any of these beings. He based his accounts on the reports of travelers and natives whom he deemed trustworthy. But through his written account, amplified by Hulsius's illustrations, the mythical took on the appearance of concrete fact. In the company of exotic but very real creatures like armadillos and sloths, Amazons and monsters took their place on a professionally drawn map situated along accurately rendered rivers near imagined lakes. The legend of the South American Amazons began in 1541 with a violent encounter between the explorer Francisco de Orellana and an indigenous tribe whose warrior women did as much fighting as 10 men. Orellana dubbed them Amazons, after the women warriors of Greek myth. More than 50 years after Orellana's account, Raleigh says that he spoke to a cacique who had been to the Amazon River and reported that these eponymous women dwell in the province of Topago. He learns that in order to maintain their numbers, the Amazons engage in a yearly ritual during which they copulate with the men of neighboring nations. But at all other times, the fearsome and bloodthirsty Amazons are to be avoided, for any man captured by them would also be used for procreative purposes, but then he would be killed. Along the Cowra River, writes Raleigh, are a nation of people whose heads appear not above their shoulders, which though it may be thought a mere fable, yet for my own part I am resolved it is true, because every child in these provinces affirms the same. They are called Ewaipanama. They are reported to have their eyes in their shoulders and their mouths in the middle of their breasts, and a long train of hair grows between their shoulders. An Indian whom I brought with me to England told me that they were the most mighty men of all the land, and used bows, arrows, and clubs thrice as big as any others in Guiana. When I seemed to doubt this, he told me that it was no wonder among them, but that the Ewaipanama were as great a nation and as common as any other in all the provinces, and had of late years slain many hundreds of his father's people. But it was not my chance to hear of them till I was come away, and if I had but spoken one word of it while I was there, I might have brought one of them with me to put the matter out of doubt. Like the Amazons, the Ewaipanama had a long history in Europe. From antiquity right up to the 17th century, they occupied a place in the popular imagination. They were always held to live at the hazy edges of the known world, and as long as there were new worlds to discover, there were reports of the men whose heads grow between their shoulders. 7 years after Raleigh's return to England, these creatures appeared again, right alongside cannibals, in a play written by Raleigh's countryman, William Shakespeare. Recounting his adventures to Desdemona's father, Othello would speak of the cannibals that each others eat, the anthropophagi, and men whose heads grew beneath their shoulders. But what of that elusive object of Raleigh's voyage, the fabled city of gold, El Dorado? Having traveled 400 miles inland, pursued and harassed by the Spanish, menaced by crocodiles, one of which ate one of his crew, Raleigh failed to find it and chose to turn back. But descriptions, rumors, and reports of the fabled city are found throughout his narrative. and these descriptions were used by Hulsius to supply an image of what Raleigh never saw, an astonishing city called by the Indians Manoa, believed to have been built by a son of the Emperor of Peru, situated on a lake called Parima, described by Raleigh as a saltwater lake 200 leagues long. The city appears not once but twice in Hulsius's book. In the second instance, the city and the lake appear on the folding map. It is remarkable that on such an accurate map, engraved by none other than the great Flemish cartographer Jodocus Hondius, we should find such a beautifully rendered fiction. For there is no city of gold, and no Lake Parima, though it would continue to appear on maps for centuries. Certainly it remained a reality for Raleigh, who made one last voyage to find it in 1617. That expedition would prove a disaster. He would lose a son in the process and go to the gallows for his ambition. The Hulsius volume shares strong affinities with numerous works in the university's special collections, both in the Natural History collection and in the library's impressive holdings of 16th and 17th century English literature. For example, Raleigh's account of Guiana complements the Dutch botanist Willem Piso's illustrated Natural History of Brazil, Guiana's neighbor to the south, written in the 17th century while that region was controlled by the Dutch. With respect to the Spanish possessions in the New World, the library holds Francisco Hernandez's landmark Natural History of Mexico, based on research conducted by the Spanish physician in the 1570s, while on a scientific mission for the King of Spain. The library also possesses the English translation of Francisco López de Gomara's account of the Spanish conquest of Mexico, one of the most important accounts of Cortez's conquests in the New World. Walter Raleigh read this book, first published in English in 1578, prior to his voyage. The library's copy is the second edition, printed in 1596, the same year in which Raleigh's account of Guiana was published. In the age of exploration, the natural world continued to reveal itself in surprising forms, including cultures that practiced body modification and demonstrated cultural practices at odds with those of the Old World. Monsters, in the form of physical abnormalities and birth defects, perplexed scientists and physicians. The impossible was constantly proving itself to be possible. In the university collections, we find several works that speak to these concerns, among them The History of Monsters, by the renowned natural scientist Ulysses Aldrovandi, in which we find creatures akin to Raleigh's headless men, as well as images of Native Americans, whom Aldrovandi saw in drawings made by New World explorers, and whose adornments seemed to transform them into fantastic creatures. Hulsius's book was a bestseller. Copies were read to bits, and rarely survive in such fine condition. In addition to being preserved in an early vellum binding, this copy has never been washed or pressed. It is complete with all of the engravings intact and still retains its map. This is not only an important book, but a fine artifact as well, worthy of study.